This is Marketing Uncomplicated. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the show. Today, I have Zachary Bernard, a 21-year-old entrepreneur from Dieppe, and I wanted to mention exactly where he came from because I think it's so great to highlight where people are calling in from. Dieppe is in New Brunswick, Canada. Zachary founded We Feature You, a PR firm that has worked with hundreds of clients since its inception in 2021. And he talks a lot about how his clients are mostly in the United States, considering he's in Canada. So we'll also dig into that. The company focuses on helping their clients build themselves into thought leaders through various media placements, and one being his and I interaction have been quite a lot with podcasting. So this includes prestigious outlets such as Forbes, Entrepreneur, NASDAQ, and USA Today. Welcome, Zachary.
Really looking forward to this.
Yes, likewise. So is it Zach or Zachary?
Zachary. Zach is fine. Doesn't matter to me.
Okay, perfect. So let's start. 21. Wow. If we look back on the millennial generation, and this is an interesting thing that I love, because I think this new generation is really poised and has been into coming out of school and really having that entrepreneur mindset. Versus I think, when I graduated, we really were on this track to find a job, you climb the ladder and so on and so forth. And then I think, for the most part across, my generation, folks are really looking to kind of jump off and do their own thing. So I love this. You're 21, where did this idea come from? Where did you see a gap in the market? And what did you want to see shifted in terms of what you ventured out and started?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say it's too long of a story. But as anyone, I've started the entrepreneurship story, maybe with the lemonade stand, corner of the street, just trying to make a buck or two.
Yeah.
Quickly realized that I really just love doing that, like business, negotiating, selling things on. I was always a big person that loved playing video games online, as a lot of kids of my generation. But a lot of people would just focus on the game. And I've always been fascinated by money. So I've always been trying to find any way that I could make money out of doing something that I love. Yeah. And I quickly realized that even in some games, there were some video game items that you could take, and some people would actually pay for them online. Mm-hmm. So I realized that I could do this, made a few $1,000s. I didn't think too much of it. I ended up going to a university actually for a year and a half until our company was doing pretty well. I decided to just leave for the time being, which fast forward 3 years later, that's probably going to be permanent.
Yeah.
From what I could tell. And I would say just from there, before I started the company, I've just tried anything that was online, business oriented, affiliate marketing, drop shipping. I feel a lot of people on social media, there's been a lot being pushed around entrepreneurship, business, starting your own business. Classic, you can make $10,000 per month by working a few hours. It's not true. You have to put in much more work than that.
Oh, yeah.
I somewhat fall into this. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it, the shiny object syndrome, where you start something, you quit. So I fell into that trap, but I quickly somewhat saw that marketing was really the way that you could get clients, you could get customers by promoting yourself. Because even if you have a great product, a great service, no one knows about it. You can't really do too much about that.
Yeah.
And I was at the time working, I was at an automation agency, and I wanted to somewhat get some attention for one of our clients. I saw that I could literally reach out to journalists, contributors, publication, and we landed a few pieces of coverage. And directly it was a switch. It was okay, I can reach out to people and get marketing from that, and I'm not spending anything. And it just quickly became a snowball effect where we started doing that for a lot of people. We built a lot of relationships. And our main goal has really just been helping clients build their thought leadership, be seen as expert. And that's been quite a ride so far.
Yeah, I love that. Before I dive into ask the different types of platforms that you guys use, I love that you bring up the concept of entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. I think I'm somebody that hates roller coasters, and I think a roller coaster ride is a lot easier than jumping into entrepreneurship. So, yes, I completely agree. It's, you got to be ready for it. And if you're going to jump ship and do something of this sort, I think it's great. And then, I think at your age to really have that power and that kind of mindset and that drive is just, it's a testament, in your personality. And I love the fact that you talk about, helping other entrepreneurs bring a voice to the table, which is so important. And specifically the ones that are in the tech startup, small business. I think that we shy away as marketers sometimes to focus on them because, it's a little bit more sort of tricky with them. Whether they're going to last or not last, is the funding there, is the funding not there, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. But I think that they need the most support more than anyone else in our outreach today as businesses.
Yeah, they're missing on that. They don't know how to market themselves. They might not have the funding to actually make it happen. And I feel that's where you have to develop like a competitive advantage. And one of
Yeah.
the ways of doing so is like pushing yourself as a thought leader. And how do you do that? It's sharing your insights, going on podcasts, going on TV, going in media publication. There's obviously a bit of a lengthy process to actually making that happen. But I think
Yeah.
that's definitely one of the stepping stones to making that happen.
Yeah, no, I love that. And as it relates to the channels that you provide each client, is it, well, obviously we know podcasting, but what are some of the other, maybe traditional PR stuff that you guys do for your clients?
Yeah, we've definitely taken that approach for like the past, like since like beginning of 2024, like emphasis more on like podcasts because I've just seen so many people wanting to have more of like that authentic connection, like building their brand. But before we dived into like the podcasting world, we had like a big focus in like press, like traditional press, getting into like media publications, like articles. That had been like the main focus for like the first like 2 years, where the main value prop or like idea behind getting press was to like help with like SEO, help with ranking credibility. So the main goal, if someone searched like a client's name, we would have like some articles show up of them sharing their insights, their thought leadership. Because there's somewhat two components. You have like first person, like social proof that I like to call it, where it's me sharing like my insights, maybe on my blog, a video, or anything. And then you have like third party validation where it's people talking about you. So it could be a media publication saying like how great you are, saying like all the things that you've done. And if you're talking about yourself, like great. But if you have someone else talking about you in a good way, in a good light, and they have like a lot of credibility, it's going to resonate much more than just me saying that I'm great. Because anyone can say that they're great, of course.
Yeah, true.
So
It's true. And it's like you and I, when we talked about this previously, it's almost like today anybody can become an author, right? It's like they can, jump out and they can just, self-publish, or what is the credibility of actually working with a publisher? I mean, there's obviously a different kind of longevity and so on. But I
mhm.
also definitely, hold true from, even like when we talk about like social media, there are three main hooks, right? One is storytelling, one is authoritative voice, and then the other one is education. And I think
Mhm.
that the nice thing about like podcasts and really kind of culminating, an entire like PR rhythm around creating your brand, it really kind of puts you forward in that limelight, if somebody is searching for you or if it's connection to your brand or the service or the type of service that you're offering. Because back in the days when it used to be about like the big box brands and like, you talked about a brand, people are now talking about who's behind the brand and who's
Mhm.
behind the scenes and like, how are they kind of launching it? And, we hear about that more so on social media where it's like X founder who has, X, billion-dollar like financial company, but you're zeroed in and you're focused on their story. So let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about, how it's really shifted in the sense of it's not just about the company and the company name. And obviously it's the success of it, but it's the story behind, the company and how this company evolved and started.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that because I think you're definitely like spot on that over like the past like few years, I'd say probably like 3, 5 years, there's been like this big shift that people want to have some sort of like emotional connection. And it's like a bit hard to do that with a company. It's like an entity, it's not a real person. But
Yeah.
once you're connecting with someone, you're understanding where they're coming from, who they are, what they've done, it's much more easy to connect with another human as opposed to like a brand. And I feel like one of the things that like I'm definitely seeing being like really big into like this year moving forward is going to be like the authenticity component, where people will want to hear people like speak about their background, who they are, what they've done, their journey, why they're here, what they're looking to accomplish. Especially with like AI, you're not even going to know what's real and what's not real.
I
So
know.
having that
Yeah.
like personal touch
I don't think
is
we're there yet, but
not yet, not yet.
yeah.
But I think that's like really that shift that we've been seeing, that people care more about people. They want to hear about them, what they're doing. Because if it's just coming from a company, it's much less like personal. There's like a reason. I'm not sure if you've ever seen those types of emails where e-commerce brand, instead of just sending like a thank you message from like the brand, they're going to take more of that personal touch and have like the founder. It's going to be formatted as the founder, but it's like
Yeah.
a thank you from her founder. And again, it's much more personal that you're like, okay, like they took the time to reach out to me out of their time. They're a really busy person. They actually care about me, as opposed to just knowing, okay, it's a company. They sent me like an automatic like thank you email. So I think it's really that personal connection and that personal touch that really makes like all the difference. Definitely.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Now, when you guys, obviously outside of like the traditional sort of platforms that you use that are like in print and online and so on, I think, this real shift in like in podcasting becoming like maybe not even just an add-on to like your like PR package, but almost like the center focus of like the PR package in essence, because of,
Yeah.
the fact that there's video, the conversation is intimate, you're really pulling out that, you know, founders why, you're digging into not even just the positives. I mean, a lot of the times, like when I brought somebody on, or like I had an interesting thing where it's like I reached out to somebody and she was like, oh my God, she's like, I don't even think we're there to even like jump on your podcast, because she's like, we're still trying to find product market fit. But I'm like, yeah, but I'm like, you're 4 years in, you're making money, you may not be making the kind of money that you want to make, but these stories are crucial for other people to like hear and listen to. So I mean, let's dive in a little bit to the really the nuts and bolts of like what podcasting can do for you, as maybe, and I don't know if you centralize it as a focus, but the pieces that connect a really well-rounded package for somebody creating a brand today.
Yeah, I think yes, like we definitely centralize it more around like the podcast component, but I would say it's not about just getting on podcasts. It's more so about building a brand by going on podcasts. And
Yes.
like what I mean by that is you can obviously have two folds. You have the component where you talk about your journey, your background, who you are. That's a bit more personal. Like I think there should be like a mix of that, but there should also be a mix of like thought leadership, like expertise, insights. Because people, they want to relate with someone. They also want to know that this person can actually deliver what they're selling and what
Yes.
they're promising. So you want to have like a mix of both. So I'd say that's like really what we've been focusing on, like trying to have like a sprinkle of both. We try to focus a bit more on like the value based aspect of things, because that's like really where we can build that credibility. We can build that thought leadership. Not everyone wants to go talk about their entire life career on a podcast, and not every podcast host is looking for that. Most of them is looking for something educational, value based, and not someone to talk about their entire life career for an hour. And I've had people wanting to do that. It
Yeah.
typically doesn't work out very well.
Yeah.
So I would say definitely focusing more on that thought leadership. The way that we structured is, even if you get on a podcast, it's much more than that. Like you have
Hmm.
to use that appearances as content. So you can use it as like educational asset, sales asset, anything like that. So if you have a client that you just onboarded, you might want to have like a welcome like email sequence. You might want to include a video about yourself, diving a bit into what you're doing, etc.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then I feel that's again where that personal touch comes in. But once you're dealing with like potential clients, you might want to have like sit podcasts that are speaking to a certain problem that you solve with your company, and then using that as like sales asset. So it's all about utilizing the podcast appearances. I see a lot of people think it's just about, okay, let's get on a podcast, we get in front of an audience, marketing, great. It's much more than that. You have to
Yeah.
use these appearances. And I mean, you run a podcast, so you already know this, but
Yeah.
using it as like content, repurposing, creating blog posts, that's one of the components to creating a personal brand. But there's also the factor that given podcasts, they even help with like SEO. They're going to rank heavily when people search you up. And that's another component where if I search someone up, I see they've been on 30 podcasts. I have probably a good feeling they know what they're talking about. If they're keeping going on podcasts, the
Yeah.
host actually likes them, and it's not just like a one-off and done,
Yeah.
where they're completely done with that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'd say that's probably how we look at podcasting for the time being, at least.
Yeah. I love that you bring that up, because content is key, especially nowadays. And I think that, yes, a lot of people think, I mean, well, let's face it, right? I mean, a business owner, is a business owner, and they don't necessarily think in the creative mindset that like us marketers like have a tendency to do so. Whereas it's like, we have this content, we can chop it up in 10 million other places and utilize it for XYZ, right? I mean, it's like, I remember when I brought on a client like who does a lot of B2B. I mean, their industry is B2B. And I said, we need to build your website to be a sales enablement tool. It's not just a website, right? So it's, how do we think about the things that you are using, or what is, the cover of your brand that can also support your sales team, that can also support your marketing team, and so on and so forth. And I love this aspect because as you mentioned just that, podcasting can be support for marketing. It can turn like a snippet of it can turn into an actual commercial. A piece of it can turn into like really hitting the nail of like, understanding your customer profiles, like pain point, what they're really going through. That's really going to, catapult them into saying, I want to buy from these guys because they get me and they know where I'm coming from. Right. So it is utilizing it in a multitude of different avenues. And it really becomes worthy at that point when you look at it from that aspect.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting that you've mentioned that, because like when we look at podcasts, and like I say this to like some clients, is the company is not the one going on a podcast. It's a person going on the podcast, a guest. And that's like much more personal. But even if it's a person going on the podcast, that still can be used as a way to grow your company by leveraging these assets, using these, having more of that personal touch. And I think that's something a lot of people are going to start doing much more, leveraging that to then be using through their marketing. But I think it's so crucial. You have to do it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think as more of these, well, if we think about, pre-COVID, right? I think that there was a concept of community-based, right? And a lot of the times what I tell my clients is, or small business owners, it's from the understanding of like, don't go big or go homes. Really increase your leverage of like starting off small and growing, right? So win local to then grow national. And then if your goals are to go global, great. Your product might pick up in another country before you hit nationally, but it's letting the fire kind of do its own thing and kind of spread. That's a bad analogy, just with everything that's happened with fires. But it's the concept of, let it kind of have its own legs to kind of move in whatever direction it's going in, right? And I think don't fear if you never thought that your product or service would hit a certain audience or like a cultural aspect of things, but let it kind of move in that direction. Like, I don't think Korean skincare ever thought that it would explode over in the United States, but guess what? They probably have a bigger market in the US than they do in Korea. My point is that, I think that you need to think about when you do these type of things, like what is the measurement of success for you? And what are you looking for to reach from a KPI standpoint? Because it's not only going to help you from a credibility level, but then how are you going to get the most use out of all this content you're developing to allow it to last as long as it can?
Yeah. And it's also like that snowball effect. Like, as you were mentioning, you try to make like an analogy, but you have to start small in a way and then like build your way up. Because I see like a lot of people, I would get on calls with people telling me like, hey, like, I want to get on Joe Rogan. Like, I know I could get on this podcast. I'm like, you know what? Probably not. I'll somewhat break it down for you. Typically, there's 3 categories. You're either a celebrity, a billionaire, or like a scientist that's doing something interesting. I don't think you fit any of those categories, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And then typically,
but it's good to have these honest conversations.
Yeah, you have to bring them down to earth and let them like, set the expectations that probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
Because I've heard rumors that they charge quite a lot of money to get on that show. But it's about like starting small, like building your way up. And as you get more traction, then you can go for like bigger like mediums, like bigger media, bigger podcasts, TV, etc. Because again, when you try to go for like a really big podcast, publication, anything, if you don't have that credibility already built through going on, like having built a personal brand, going on other podcasts, it's going to be much more harder to get on that podcast. They're going to look at you, they're going to see nothing. But if you slowly build your way up, it's like a compound effect where I'm going to get on this podcast might give me a chance. Okay, now this one might as well. And it consistently goes up. And then you get like better opportunities. And I think that's really interesting what you mentioned, that having like you don't know what's going to happen. You might target a market that's going to completely blow up. You didn't have these expectations,
Yeah.
and it might completely shift like your approach to marketing in the first place.
Yeah.
You might have planned to go there, and then you're ending up completely the other side of the room, but you're seeing as much value there. So yeah.
Yeah. When was the decision to kind of bring in like podcasting as part of your and it might have been out the gate, but I feel like podcasting has kind of had this trend whereby it's, when I used to work at a media company, I don't know if you remember the podcast Serial, that was about this boy that, was a suspected was the suspect to, a murder case that had happened. And then it became, she did an investigative report and she had conversations back and forth with him while he was in prison, for example. Right. And then I feel like, the storytelling aspect of podcast was what came out the gate. And I feel like now we've really merged into like this educational sort of platform, which goes back to my hooks, like storytelling, education, and authoritative voice. I feel like we're really kind of moving in that path of like education and authoritative with the side of like storytelling. And those podcasts still exist, but this boom all of a sudden of not necessarily entrepreneurship, but like really like what is happening in the entrepreneurship world? How are we shifting? How are we moving? What's going on with AI? Media jumped ship and started to do a bunch of stuff even like 5-6 years ago. So what have you seen in those trends? And, when did you guys decide to add this in? And so it really goes into like how you have like grown your business as trends are happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly like what we've done. And I think that's interesting. You mentioned like podcasts, because I think like there is like so many podcasts, like true crime and stuff, like fiction, like reading books. And I feel that was like the main focus of like podcasts, like very early on. But now it has gone more into, like, as you mentioned, an educational approach, conversational, people talking about their journey, like a bit more personal. And I think that's like really interesting. And when we're looking at like trends, I would say like you're spot on. Like that's exactly like what happened to us. We got to, I would say, the end of like 2023. And we somewhat saw like a shift where people wanted to build their personal brand. They wanted to push out content, and they wanted to have more of that thought leadership via like video content. And like I would remember myself going on like strategy sessions with like, hey, if you want to build your thought leadership, like you should be just trying to push out like video content. Like take an hour a week, make some content, publish it on like your LinkedIn website, etc. And I was like, we could do this for our clients, and this could be definitely beneficial. And I somewhat saw the podcast medium as a way to do that, because we've taken that approach of like pitching these journalists, publications, etc., and doing it for like podcasts. And by doing that, we're also getting like an audience of people that are interested, perhaps like the services our client has, their expertise. And it was like the smartest decision we've done so far for the company, I would say. So we've added a lot of interest, and I'm only seeing podcasts like growing and growing. So I think it was definitely a good move for now, at least.
Yeah, no, it definitely, I think it is. And I think that there's only going to be a continuum of like an upward trend towards this. And I don't think AI is ever going to take over this aspect of podcasting. And if it does, I don't want to be around, because it's there's no authenticity in the conversation and that human touch. Because then I think all humanity has lost their touch at that point, right?
It's interesting because I swear, like a few days ago, I saw like a podcast that was like completely like AI made, because like some people, you could hear the voice, but you could hear it, and you knew it wasn't like a real person. It's like, okay, this is creepy. Like we're starting to get there, and there's just not that personal touch. So I
there
think
isn't.
No, definitely not.
And I don't think people are going to move in that trend. I mean, even I think that as things evolve and, technology has evolved, I think that we have all adapted to it and all have, this affinity towards, this is really cool. But I think that there's this nostalgia that we're always going to have as humans in terms of like, what was older. Like, I mean, even with like a newspaper, there was a research that was conducted that even the younger generation wanted the tangibility of holding a newspaper in their hand versus like seeing things on digital only. Right?
Yeah, it's like the books that you have like in your background. Like I remember starting to like read books on like my phone, but I just could not absorb like the information the same way, and
Yeah.
then started buying books again. And I feel it's
Yeah.
like much more easier to do so. So I feel
Yeah.
that we're going back to the old ways in a little bit.
Yeah.
I kind of like that.
Yeah. And I wonder if COVID had something to do with that from like pushing us back, because bookstores are coming back, but not like the big bookstores like Barnes and
Yeah,
Nobles, but your like corner bookstore, your, your mom and pop's bookstore, or you like even walking to an old bookstore that has like been around forever. I
yeah,
think that that's something that is stuck, and it's that nostalgia is never going to die. I think, with us as humans. And I think that shifting into like I think it's going to have a place maybe from the standpoint of educational aspects. Like, okay, you can jump on and you can do a podcast to like educate your to onboard somebody into a new company, right?
yeah,
Or educate them on how to utilize this program best, or maybe it's like it's training, or like whatever it is, right? I don't
yeah.
think that those things necessarily need to be recorded by a human, because it's pure education.
Mhm.
um yeah, but I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like we've been using AI to just be more efficient. Like I think that's really it. Like you hear a lot of people saying that, oh, okay, it's going to take over the world. We're going to lose our jobs. Not
Yeah.
really. I think it's just going to change how we approach doing our jobs, and it's just going to help us be more efficient, do it faster, and then get help. And then by doing that, I mean, we're evolving as a society. Like we're not just keeping the old ways. We're learning
Yeah.
new things. We're doing things better and more efficiently. And I think it's a plus. Like I think there's a big plus in that. But for like other professions, etc., I mean, it can be like a negative where you might lose your job, like
Yeah.
your position might get affected. But I think there's a balance to it where there's going to be the plus and the minus. And if you want to be in the plus side of things, I mean, you have to evolve. Like you have to like not be left behind. And that's
Yeah.
where like the education comes in, I think.
I totally agree. What do
Yeah.
you think, from what you've seen over the time of building your company in terms of outreach of PR? Like, what industries do you feel that perform really well? Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just the aspect of the storytelling, or, you know, in terms of like who you've had as clients, what do you think has really resonated and done well from either PR or storytelling, or what has really taken off from like the packages that you've put together for particular clients?
Yeah.
What
I
is
would
that like kind of like?
that sweet spot in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say most people that we collaborate with are going to be like the business owners, the founders, the leaders, etc. So it's usually going to be about building like their thought leadership into the world, like having that third party validation. And it's usually going to be like going after big outlets, like big publication. And the main reason is we sometimes will try to avoid industry specific type publication. And the main reason is not everyone knows like those really specific industry. But if I'm saying Forbes, I'm saying USA Today, Entrepreneur, it's going to have like a higher likeliness of people actually recognizing those names. So that's like usually what we try to go for. So if we have any clients who try to go for these really big publication, obviously we do start with that snowball effect where we go for the smaller ones, local, national, we build our way up. But the main end goal is always going to be like hitting those big publication, getting them some big coverage. Same thing for like podcasts. We have to build our way up there. But it still again falls down into being able to build that thought leadership profile, being able to have them share their insights on topics that they are an expert on. So then they can leverage it as like sales assets, shorten their sales cycle. And when people look them up, again, you have all this coverage, press showing up. And it's just making their marketing like efforts more efficient. Like that's how I would describe PR. If you look at PR, podcast, TV, it's just about making your marketing efforts more efficient if you actually use it, if you actually leverage it. Because you'd be surprised the amount of people I've worked with in the past where we give them all the guidance, all the
Oh
resources,
yeah.
and they don't leverage it. And it's like it just brings you back to the question, like, why did you work with us? If you wanted this
Yeah.
sort of an outcome, we gave you everything to do so, but you didn't follow the guidance. And sometimes it just leaves me confused. So
Yeah.
I really try to set the expectation. If you want to work with us, please keep in mind that we want you to get results. So you do have to follow what we tell you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that
Yeah,
if they're investing in it, then that really should
exactly.
be like a focus for them, you know? I mean, hopefully it's not what I dealt with like as a young marketer when I was working for an agency, and all of a sudden it was like it was government money, and government money is like spend it or lose it, you know?
Yeah.
And like, I mean, anybody would love to have that, right? But
Yeah.
it's the concept of like they would come at us at the last hour, like before, 3 weeks before the end of the year, and we're scrambling to make the most out of it. And I hated that because for me, it wasn't just about spend it to or you lose it. It was about how do we spend it in a way that's really going to have a good ROI for you. So I'm 100% agreement that if you're
Mhm.
going to invest in something, make sure you take it all the way through to the end, if there is in fact an end.
Oh,
But
yeah.
don't just, say, I need to do this just because, that's what I was marketed to, or that's what I've been told, that I should be doing, for my business and so on.
And I feel it's again like people will see something sometimes and I'll feel it's like the magic bullet. Like you'll do this, everything's gonna happen. But if you don't follow and you pull the trigger on your end as well, it's just not gonna happen. You have to put in the
Yeah.
work, a little bit at least, to
Yeah.
make it happen.
I agree. I totally agree. What do you think are the biggest barriers to entry for somebody to make the decision to jump in to do PR? Because, there's been a lot of, it's not recent, but it's,
Yeah.
oh, I can't do PR right now. I don't have the budget, or it's too expensive, or it's just not going to give me the ROI, or the data's not there.
hmm I feel like probably the first thing you should be doing is if you look at PR, you're even considering it, like you don't always have to work with a PR firm directly. There's like a lot of resources out there. As like you've probably heard of like Haro, Connectively, like Featured. Those are all platforms where you can get like free coverage just by like responding to queries by like journalists, etc. But there is obviously some industries that especially in like marketing, where a lot of people will want to see like data, like KPI metrics, like seeing how many people went to like a certain page because they basically can compare it to like advertising and like marketing. But when you look at like traditional PR, like I can't tell you how many people clicked on a link on a web page when we got an article published by a journalist. Like, we
Yeah.
didn't pay for the article; it wasn't an advertorial. We're not going to get these statistics, unfortunately. And I feel that's a lot of people do expect sometimes, and that's where you do have to like address some misconception. But I feel that it's really about conveying exactly, okay, if you look at PR, it's going to be much more of a way to amplify your marketing efforts. Like, I would not look at this as a way to get like 100 people like ringing your phone because you've been on TV or you've been featured in like an article. That's like a big misconception that we've like had to express like clients or potential clients before working with us. And sometimes like you literally have to tell them, okay, I mean, based on like what you've told me, like you might just want to go invest into like paid ads, like Google ads, Facebook ads.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you're looking at PR for your use case, I don't think it's going to be that beneficial. Because like we might have someone come to us, they're an e-commerce brand, and they're trying to drive like sales of their product directly. It's like, okay, you want to get in this publication, it's a bit more broad, it's going to get you that credibility. But are we going to be optimizing for sales conversions? Probably not. It's going to be more the storytelling aspect. So I mean, I'd probably go with Facebook ads, to be honest with you. And I feel
Yeah.
that's where you have to be really transparent with some clients and set expectation from the get-go.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so interesting because so do you work on a lot of like earned media or paid media for your clients?
We do both. I would say that we definitely focus more on like the earned media where we've built relationships with like various connection. The way we typically structure approaches, we'll like collaborate with like various connection contributors, journalists, editors, publication, etc. And it's more like on like an opportunity basis. So when they're looking for a certain type of story, a certain type of like op-ed, like a quote within an article, like that's where we'll present those type of opportunities to our clients. But I mean, like full transparency, like we do have partnerships with publication where it is like advertorials. We'll tell their
Yeah.
clients, okay, we have a partnership with this publication. You want the credibility component, like we can get you in that. But it is like a paid partnership to be fully transparent with you.
Yeah.
And a lot of clients, they appreciate that. They love that. Like some of them
Yeah.
literally just care about being able to have that credibility to then use in their marketing efforts. And sometimes that's really the only thing that matters to them. And I guess it's more so like, what is your use case with it, of course?
Yeah. No, that's that. I think, with the way the world is moving, transparency is obviously key to understand, like where
Yeah.
people are getting like their press from. But I still think at the end of the day, it's like, a Forbes or entrepreneur isn't just going to say, okay, you can pay to get in. It's obviously they look at who, you guys are bringing into the table, whether it's you or somebody else, right? I mean, not any Joe Schmo can come up and say, here's X amount of money. I want an article in your media outlet. I'm sure you can if you dropped enough, but they do really focus on ensuring that they maintain their reputation as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's something that's going to be like emphasized even more, like moving forward in like the upcoming years or so, because again, it's about that authenticity, and I feel there has been with like everything going on with like the media, you don't know what's true, what's not true anymore. So I think they're definitely going to be more focused on like their guidelines, making sure they vet people, and in a way, it's a good thing. I mean, it just makes sure that validation that people get from being in that publication comes from they were actually like credible, they were actually someone that deserve getting that coverage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. What do you think the biggest mistake companies do by not including PR?
That's a good question. I would say that like when you going back to like the point I was saying like earlier with like the third party validation, if a company doesn't do like any podcasts, they don't do any PR media or anything, there's somewhat leaving that component of having that third party validation where someone talks about them, they validate what they're doing. And also they're missing out on like just ranking SEO benefits of having things show up that are actually credible. So I think that's probably one of like the main things I would say. If you're not actually capitalizing on PR, you're going to be missing out on a lot of that component because you can talk about yourself, as I was saying like earlier, but it doesn't resonate as much as
Yeah.
like someone talking about you saying like, hey, they crushed it for us. I mean, that
Yeah.
would be more of like a case study, like video testimonial, but could be a publication saying like, talking about the results you've had for clients, what you've been doing in the space, how impactful it's been. So I think that's probably the one component missing, but I think definitely including any other aspect of social proof in your approach, such as like what I just mentioned, like having video case studies, testimonials. I would consider that like second person, third party validation, not third party, second person validation. But that's just like how I said. I'm not even sure if that makes sense, to be honest.
No, that definitely makes sense. It totally makes sense because, no, I totally understood that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I'd say that's probably like one of like the mistakes. I would
Yeah.
definitely try to include it in your marketing strategy. Like you don't have to go spend like tens of thousands of dollars to get marketing, like PR. Like, as I said, you can start small. You can try to send a few pitches here and there, work your way out. It's not gonna take you like hundreds of hours. Like we've used platforms like as the ones that I mentioned earlier, and we've gotten coverage for clients like pretty easily. But again, you do have to have interesting people to pitch.
Yes.
If you're not interesting, I mean that's another component of the pitch, of course.
No, totally. But I also think it's like, with most of the small businesses that I talk to and that I work with, it's this bombardment of information of what they've learned about PR, that you do have to spend X money. It is expensive. I'm not going to have the ROI. I'm not going to see the data to attribute it back to XYZ. That there has been this overarching kind of understanding of like PR not being accessible for everybody. That I think is like what you, as a person who has a PR agency, has to then educate to really flip the script. That it is attainable. You can step into the market. You don't necessarily have to say no, PR is only until I hit it big or until I become a unicorn startup or whatever it is. That it should be part of the budget, even if it is a couple of thousand, or even if it is just $1,000 to begin with. But to your point, it brings them back to that credibility to really have that stamp. I've been featured in X, which in a psychological manner makes people, oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean you're spot on. So you can start small. You don't have to go directly try to spend tens of thousands. And again, it becomes like a differentiator in your approach where any of your marketing efforts become more effective. So I would say that's definitely something I would implement. And again, you don't have to work with PR firm. There's other ways to do so that are much more cost effective. But if you want to save time and actually get coverage, then the PR firm might have the relationships to help you do so.
Yeah. Well, flipping a little bit on to you, how did you build your credibility to build these partnerships with these companies? Considering that you really have a roster and a bank of a lot of folks that you can tap into for your clients in really a quick span of a couple of years. So how did you hit the ground running to really build your personal brand as Zach for your company to say, you should partner with us because we can deliver X?
I think the first thing is definitely doing like what you preach. It's like talking about PR. I mean, I've been myself featured in like publications. I've
Yeah.
given insights, I've gone on podcasts, etc. I think that's the first thing. Like you're doing something, you're teaching something, like you should be doing it for yourself. So that has been like the main component. But I would say definitely just like once you start getting a few clients, like when you start a company, like that's like how it starts. Again, going back to like the snowball effect, like analogy. You're going to start, you're going to get a few like results, you're going to get some examples from clients, and that's like how you build that. So I think we've really just taken that approach of slowly like building our way by getting that coverage for our clients. And then it just has made our approach more efficient. But as we've gotten more clients featured, it helped increase our credibility. Where if we wanted to pitch ourselves to other publication journalists, like we did have like that expertise, like where we've done it before, delivered for clients, and that has like obviously been helpful. But I would say like as marketers, so I feel like we're all guilty of that. That a lot of people, we're going to do marketing for our clients, we're going to do PR for our clients, but sometimes we're going to forget to do it for ourselves. And it's hilarious because I speak to so many people. I'm like, okay, you're in marketing, you do this for your client, but you haven't done this. Like,
I know.
Yeah, I know I'm guilty. So I think it's interesting. So I would say probably over the past few months, I've been trying to get myself on podcasts, obviously such as yourself and the press. But it also goes back to just the results you get for your client.
Yeah.
If you're able to
it's like the
have
age-old
results.
saying, and not to interrupt you, but it's
Yeah,
like,
go ahead.
how like doctors are their own worst patients. I think as marketers, we're our own worst clients.
Oh, yeah. Because we're not doing what we're teaching to clients sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we
I
need to
agree
be
with
doing
that.
more of it.
Oh, yeah. Definitely much more.
Yeah, totally. So tell us a little bit more about your process in terms of onboarding a client, because it's not just a one size fits all, and it never is, right? Because I think that what I also like to preach is that marketing is templatized in the aspect of there's PR, there's social media, there's paid ads, there's, XYZ and all these channels that are out there. But that doesn't mean you as business X are going to have to get on all these different channels. And how do you slowly build up and grow? So I'm assuming for the same standpoint of your company, it is building them into something and kind of growing them. Or if they have the funds, it's kind of let's tackle it in a big bang, way. Or for the ones that are wanting to start smaller, let's start here and then grow you as your marketing grows and so on and so forth. Tell us how you approach that to make it accessible for those that are starting and really like, depending on what their end goal is.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably like the latter, like somewhat growing like with them. Like we obviously do work with clients that have a lot of marketing budget. They'll dive into getting like a lot of press, a lot of podcasts like directly. That's great because we have the connection, but typically those people are going to have the expertise, are going to have the background. They're typically going to be like a bit like easier to pitch. But for the new people that might be like a startup, might not have like a lot of funding, it's going to be slowly like somewhat growing with them, becoming that partner where we support them at like every point of like their journey. And then again, it's not just about getting the press, not about just getting the podcast, it's about taking that to another level, like actually using it, making sure that we're someone delivering the outcome that we promised you, which is becoming a thought leader, building your personal brand. And that ties back into like content production, etc. So the way we typically structure like onboarding, it does depend on if it's for press, if it's for podcasts. I'm going to take the podcast example because that is a bit more like recent. But the way that we typically structure it is we want to get like a better understanding like who you are, what you've done, your background, your journey, what kind of topics you can speak to that are actually going to resonate with like your target audience, what kind of podcasts you might want to get on. And then like based on that, we will take that, we will come up with a strategy, we'll do some additional research and make sure we're not missing like anything. And it's more about being able to share like, hey, this is exactly like how we will approach pitching you. These are the key points we think are like really interesting. These are a topic, these are the podcasts we'll go after. And it's really just to make sure we're on the same page. Because the last thing I want to do is have our team start sending pitches out. They get booked on a podcast or on a publication. And it's like, I can't even speak to them in the first place. We obviously want to like avoid that component. But once you start getting that, it's more about just continuously like improving the messaging, tweaking your approach, the pitches to maximize the relevancy. But I would say
Yeah.
that's usually like the onboarding process, but we are tweaking, improving every day the processes. I'm sure you probably do as well with what you're
Yeah,
doing.
totally. Yeah, totally. I love that. Zach, this has been so informative and, really, really a depth of knowledge into how you should tackle PR, why you should tackle PR, and how it can support your business. I'd love for you to leave us with three main things that somebody should be thinking about as they're either launching their business or they could be well into their business and having a better understanding of like all the channels that marketing has to offer and maybe a bigger budget at this time. But what are the things that they should be thinking about, whether it's A, stepping into PR for the first time, or B, stepping back into PR and testing it again? Because
Mhm.
not all agencies are created equal. So that is
Yes.
one thing to look out for to make sure that you're choosing the right partner to support your goals.
I agree. I would say probably like the first thing you should be looking at is I'll take the example of like just starting your company, perhaps starting to get traction. First thing you should be doing is establishing like your digital presence. And like what I mean by that, it's like the most basic thing that you could do, but making sure you're present on every social media platform. You have like profiles on like website to help you rank, like Crunchbase. It's a really good example. Medium, things that help you rank, because what you want to do is you want to control what is being said about you and what is actually showing up. So if you can
Mm-hmm.
send it to those sites, they rank like really heavily. And then having a website, you'd be surprised. I've spoken to people who didn't even have a website.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
like, yeah, I think that's the main issue here. You know what I mean? You want us
Yeah.
to pitch you, but we don't have a website. Even like social media, just making sure you have the bare minimum is going to
Yeah.
be the main thing that you should be doing. But you should also be keeping in mind like where my target audience is. Like if you're targeting like school teachers, for example, using a random example, you probably will not find a lot of them on LinkedIn. You probably will look at like Instagram, like they might be looking at ideas for like their classroom, stuff like that, even TikTok. So you have to like find out where your audience is in like the first place and then cater your like presence towards that. So I think that's first step. Second step is know that PR can be done in a cost-effective manner if you know where to look and how to actually do it. There
Yeah.
is resources such as Hero, Connectively featured available to you. Some of them are even free where you don't have to pay anything. And you can always find someone on like Upwork and stuff like that that might have experience as a publicist that will do it on like an hourly basis. Will they
Yeah.
guarantee results? No. But do they have some experience that you could benefit from? Yes. And I think the third component is use your press and use those efforts into your marketing to amplify them. If you invest into a service to help you grow, get PR, and you do not use it, you shouldn't have bought it in the first place.
Oh, yeah. 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 I
I think
love
we're in
that.
agreement with that.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a powerful ending. Absolutely. Well, Zach, thank you so much for being on the podcast, taking the time to really educate us, and really how to begin, how to start, and what to do and what not to do. This has been really informative. We appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll have you back on soon.
Thank you so much, Sasha.
Yeah. Thank you.